Who was Django Reinhardt? Ask any guitar player worth his salt, and he's going to tell you he spent a whole bunch of time trying to woodshed at least a couple of his solos. In a nutshell, Django Reinhardt, along with his buddy Stefan Grappelli on violin, played some of the best innovative jazz in Europe at the time, and he did it all with the use of only 2 fingers. I'm Tom A. from West Coast Rambles True Tales, and this is Django 101. Please like and subscribe. This is a great story. It's got fire, tragedy, triumph, Nazis. Django Reinhardt was born January 23, 1910, in Belgium. He played banjo guitar in the family band for years, but at 15 he got really good and started busking around the local cafes there in France. At the age of 18, Django proved himself to be a great banjo guitar player, and he got a job with the British bandleader. But before he could even do one gig, tragedy struck. One night when he was going to bed, he knocked over a candle and it caught a whole bunch of paper flowers that his wife was making for sale. His caravan went up in flames quickly and he barely made it out of there alive. In fact, like half of his body was so burned, he spent 18 months in the hospital. They said you're never going to be able to use your left leg and probably have to amputate it. I'm not sure if you'll be able to use your arm, and it was his playing arm. It had burned his hand so bad, all that was left was like the use of these 2 fingers, and then like this was kind of crumpled up over here. You could see the pictures. So while he's in the hospital recuperating for 18 months, his brother Joseph comes over and brings him a guitar. So without anything to do, the guy just starts noodling and becomes super proficient at this guitar. No one even told him you needed all fingers. He just started playing with the 2 fingers, basically. So after Django gets out of his 18 months in the hospital, he gets his guitar and starts going around France, and he plays occasional gigs in the clubs around there, and he's just barely making enough money to survive, basically. One note about Django is that he really didn't have a concept of money, and he could barely read or write or understand it. But that didn't seem to stop him. He didn't really care. He just wanted to play guitar and live day by day. I guess that's the gypsy way. At this time, Django's playing all kinds of music. He hasn't really been introduced to jazz until his buddy, Emile Savetry, who's like a French artist and painter, he shows him his jazz collection. And his jazz collection obviously has a lot of good American people like Duke Ellington and Joe Venuti, Louis Armstrong. He listens to the jazz and he's kind of enamored by it, and he starts adapting some of these songs to guitar. Let's go to 1934. Django is working with Stefan Grappelli, another young musician who plays violin, and they're playing for the Hot Club of France. It's called the Quintet du Hot Club of France. And anyways, these guys are great, and they start getting a name all around Europe as a premier jazz group, and it's all strings. You know, when you think of the Django era, these are the records that you're going to want to think of. Most notably, like Minor Swing is the one that everyone always listens to. And then there's other, I Like Daphne. He basically played like all the hit jazz songs, but they played it, with their strings, with their particular instruments. Now let's get into their instruments for a minute. This was before amplification, so Django was playing, I believe it was a Selmer, and they also had the McAfee guitar, but they were acoustic guitars with a really good resonator in it, so that the sound could actually go out to the back of the room. You needed to hear it, because there was no amplification. So what he would do also is he would pick really hard. He had a tortoiseshell pick that was really hard and thick, and he wouldn't rest his palm on the guitar. He would like he's shaking out a match when he would start doing it. And the guy was so good at guitar. It wasn't. He used every bit of it. You know, you listen to it. He's got harmonics in it. He's got incredible runs, and just to think he's only using 2 fingers for soloing, it's kind of amazing when you think about it. And as a side note, I've only seen a couple guys like try to do his solos with 2 fingers, mostly notably like John Jorgensen. I saw that guy play it, and he'll do some of his solos, but only with 2 fingers. And it's like, when you listen to it, it's hard enough to try to do it with 4 fingers playing it. So anyways, it's amazing what this guy did, but that's all he did was play guitar. You know, the guy couldn't read or write really, and he didn't really care about money or anything. He just cared about playing guitar when he felt like it. So I guess if you're doing that, you have a better chance of like being really proficient at guitar. But that's a side note. So they have these great records from 34 to 39. Now at the beginning of World War II, the group is playing out in England. And Stefan Grappelli decides to stay in England. Good idea. But for some reason, Django wants to go back to France. And of course, France is occupied by the Nazis at this point. Now this does 2 things. Most of all the good players, all the American players in France take off, and so that leaves Django as probably the best player in Europe and in France at the time. But the bad part about it is the Nazis don't like Romany, which is another name for gypsy. They had to wear a brown triangle on their clothes. You know, sort of like if you're gay, you had to wear a pink triangle, or a Jewish with a Jewish star. Gypsies had to wear a brown triangle. So they were not looked upon with favor by the Nazis. But nevertheless, he did really well at that time and started playing really a lot of clubs, made some pretty good money, even though he really didn't know what to do with the money. But then, as the Nazis start to lose control of France, and they realize they're going to lose the war, at that point, Django thinks it's a good time to get out of town. He tries to escape France, but he gets stopped by this German officer who happens to be a fan of his. Now, normally you'd think that he'd go straight to the concentration camp, but this fan knows who Django is, likes his work, and gives him a free pass and sends him back to France. A couple days later, Django tries again, makes it all the way to the Swiss border, and then the Swiss guards send him back. So Django ends up having to spend the rest of the war in France, but at this time he's already losing a lot of his player friends who either get captured or they actually join the resistance. But not Django. He's not that really aggressive of a guy. And after the war, about autumn of 1946, Django Reinhardt finally gets his chance to go to the U.S. and start seeing American jazz players. And he gets a couple gigs with Duke Ellington. Now, he's only in the U.S. for 4 months. And in true Django style, he doesn't bring his guitar. Someone gives him a guitar, and he's got an amp, and he starts playing it, and he's okay at it. But I read in one book that he had commented like, man, I wish I had my old guitar. They play like pianos. Nonetheless, he does really well. He does great. Does a couple concerts with Duke Ellington at the Carnegie Hall. But the problem is he just gets to play like 4 songs that night, kind of as a side gig. He gets promised some gigs in California. That never comes through. And kind of disheartened, he takes off back to Europe. But at this point, he kind of goes full Django. And sometimes he would show up for gigs. Sometimes he wouldn't show up for gigs. Maybe he'd show up with his guitar or with not his amp, or he'd show up with, not everything he needed. Or sometimes they'd find him like, hey man, where are you supposed to be for this gig? And he'd be out on the beach walking or smelling the dew. He just didn't care. In 1950, Benny Goodman actually asked him to play with his band. And, he says, yeah, I'll do it. And then later has second thoughts, and then, no, he doesn't do it. One night after a gig, he's coming home and he has a brain hemorrhage. And it takes a doctor a full day to get to him. And by that time, he passes away at the age of 43. Now, talk about the influence of Django on other players. Anyone, like I said, anyone worth his salt has got into Django. When he was in America, I know Les Paul, you got to talk to Django. He was a big fan of his. Jimmy Bryant, if you know who that is, a lightning fast guitar player, 50s and 60s. He had no respect for any other guitar player except for Django. If you get into like Grateful Dead, Grisman, those guys, he actually had records with Stefan Grappelli when Stefan Grappelli was still alive. Delve into Django if you haven't at all. My wife actually can't stand Django music. It's really more for guitar players, I think. When you go to a gig, guys ripping on Django, all the guitar players are watching and everyone else is just kind of checking their watch. Of course, some of the best players now are still the European guys. I'd have to say Barelli Legrin is one of my favorites. There's a German guy named Jasko Stefan, he's really great too. I know if you're a Django follower, you have your comments on who's better and who's not. To be honest with you, I can't tell. They're all great. In America, you've got John Jorgensen. He's probably the best. And every once in a while, there's guys coming up and popping up who are just really great. If you get deeper into this, it might be fun for you to take a look at a guy named Oscar Aleman. He was out of South America, and he did similar guitar playing at the same time, but he did it with fingers. He didn't use a pick. And he has a lot of the same songs. Check out his song Tico Tico. That's really good. It's hard to mistake Django's influence on rock and roll and other music at the time, because he's got all those fast notes, his phrasing and cool lines and use of harmonics and all that stuff is really innovative at the time. But more than anything, I would think Django, his whole attitude, he never learned to read or write so well, but he could play guitar really good. So we got to say thanks, Django Reinhardt, for all that great picking you did, and for possibly being like the first rock star, only showing up for gigs when you feel like it, but ripping when you did. So thanks, Django Reinhardt, and thanks for watching West Coast Ramble. We'll see you on the next one.